everything's going well at LAS. I've been part of LAS for many years. So, and Rosemary and I have worked together many times, and as well as with Dr. Fernandez. So, we're both LAS folks, even if you may not know us very well. All right, so we'll get things moving along. Just a few housekeeping bits for everyone. So, every participant has 15 minutes for your presentation, and to help you along the way, I'm going to hold up some signs, if that would be preferable, to let you know you have 5 minutes left, which is like a yellow light, right? And then 2 minutes left, sort of a quasi red light. And then if you go beyond the time, we'll probably ask you to wrap it up, if that's all right. So actually, Bailey, just a quick question. Would you prefer, and can you see these signs, or would you prefer that I say you have 5 minutes left, but I feel bad interrupting you, but whatever you're most comfortable with is what counts.
Signs okay.
Signs? Okay, you can see those well enough? Okay, perfect. So related to that, for those of you who aren't presenting, as I see, I think everybody has, if you could turn on your mute, as well as remove your video, just so it isn't distracting for Bailey when she's trying to find the sign that I'm holding up, and you have all these video images all over the place. So thank you for that. Save your questions to the very end as well, please, after all of the presentations. So we'll take, just write down your questions on a piece of paper or enter them in your phone or whatever. And then at the very end, in about an hour from now, because each presentation is about 15 minutes, we'll take all your questions, and you can just raise your hand on the screen, because might be a little bit hard and difficult for us to use the chat. So just raise your hand and we'll take all your questions at that time. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I missed. Again, just make sure you look up every once in a while, because I will be holding up signs as we get closer. So, Rosemary, is there anything else that you can think of that I may have missed?
No, I think you covered it all. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And like I said, make sure you raise your hand, right? If you have a question at the end, right?
Presentations will be recorded, right, Rosemary?
Yeah, it's recording right now. Catherine reminded me
right.
to turn it on. Yes.
Perfect.
And so our first presenter is Billy Wilson, and the title of their presentation is Latinx English language learners in Wisconsin schools. Okay, Billy, you can start.
Take it away.
Okay. Okay, so as I said, my name is Bailey Wilson. I'm going to be presenting my capstone, which is called Latinx English Language Learners in Wisconsin Schools, a case study. I first like to start with the land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that UW-Eau Claire occupies the sacred and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. I honor the land of the Ojibwe and Dakota nations. So first, I'm just going to go into an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to start by talking about Latinx English learners, both in Wisconsin and nationwide, and whether they're getting the supports that they need. Then I'm going to talk about what my research questions were and some prior studies that led me into what I wanted to look into. And then the current study, which is an anonymous survey, and then I'm going to talk about what my results were. And then some conclusions and implications more specifically for educators, but also for everybody to keep in mind in general. First of all, Latinx English learners in public schools. So nationwide, 1 in 5 students speak a language other than English at home, and 70% of those students speak Spanish as their home language. So there has been a dramatic growth of Latino English learners in the past 4 decades across the country. More specifically in Wisconsin, the Latinx population has grown as well. In 1970, there was 1.4% of Wisconsin population was Latinx, and in 2014, that number grew to 6%. Also in 2014, the proportion of Latinx students in Wisconsin public K-12 schools was 11% of all students. And English learners in general also has grown. So in 2000, it was 2.6% of all students, and in 2018, that number was 6.4%. So you can see that these populations are growing, and so we need to pay more attention to how they're getting support and making sure that they're being supported adequately in schools. Now I'm going to talk about whether they're getting the supports that they need. So I have a couple quotes here from one of the studies that I looked at. So English learners are significantly less likely than other students to score at or above a basic level of achievement regardless of the subject. ELs are less likely to have access to high-quality teachers, resources, and assessments that are appropriate. ELs are overrepresented in special education programs, and the population is growing rapidly, but teacher training is pervasively lacking and outdated. So as you can see, they are not necessarily getting this as much support as they should be getting, and there's definitely room for improvement. Now I just want to talk a little bit about where I was getting my background research and how it led me to what I wanted to look into. The first one I want to talk about is language instruction, educational programs, and academic achievement of Latino English learners. So this one was an overview of different types of programs in different states and talked about how state policy affects academic achievement based on the type of program. The next one is creating and sustaining inclusive instructional settings for English language learners. So this one talked about what inclusive settings for them means and specifically what the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has done. The next one is the condition of education in Wisconsin. So this was a survey done by the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research at UW-Madison of teachers around Wisconsin. And then the last one is Latino English learners bridging achievement and cultural gaps between schools and families. So this was a focus group of parents and teachers in a rural school in the Rocky Mountains region. Now, what are my research questions? What are the legal precedents for English language support? Which strategies work well, which fall short? What programs are in place in Wisconsin? Are the families and cultural backgrounds of Latinx EL students being sufficiently supported and involved? Are teachers sufficiently prepared to support Latinx EL students? And how can Latinx ELs be better supported in Wisconsin schools? So first, what are the legal precedents for English language support? One of the first cases that really pushed this issue into the spotlight was Law v. Nichols in 1974, which argued that if English language learners were not receiving adequate support, that was in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This led to the Equal Educational Opportunity Act of 1974, which legally required supports for ELs, but didn't specify the type of program it had to be. And then there's a case that was in 1981, Castaneda versus Bickard, which recommended criteria for complying with the Equal Education Opportunity Act, including language instruction educational programs that are supported by experts, having districts provide adequate resources and personnel, and constantly evaluating and adjusting the program. Next, which strategies work well and which fall short? So in the past, there was more of a deficit model blaming the students for the low achievement. So it has since gotten better as educators have realized how important it is to support these students in their language learning journey. There have been studies found that pull-out practices and teaching English separately from other languages, or from other subjects, hinders continuous learning. So the push now is for more inclusive learning environments for these students. So those cultivate language proficiency to academic grade level, ensure access to high quality curriculum within effective teaching and learning environments, and promote sociocultural integration of all students. So more generally, being very beneficial for English language students is culturally responsive instruction. So that addresses the needs of all students, affirms each student's cultural identity, and draws upon students' backgrounds as an asset. Next, more specifically, what is in place in Wisconsin for ELs. So Wisconsin state law requires bilingual education when there are 10 ELs with the same native language in grades K through 3, or 20 ELs in grades 4 and higher within a school building. However, if this criteria isn't met, the EL students still, they're required to get support. It just doesn't have to be in a bilingual model. So Wisconsin used to have response to intervention, or RTI, but it's since been adjusted to be Wisconsin's equitable multi-level systems of support. So this chart on the right here is what that is. So it's a focus on equitable services, practices, and resources, having high expectations for all students, creating welcoming environments, and sustaining students' identities, home cultures, and language. There's also a focus on family engagement. And then there's still the continuum of supports with a strong universal level, which is kind of where the RTI comes into that. And Wisconsin DPI also created Culturally Responsive Education for All Training and Enhancement, or CREATE, which is an organization for professional development for educators in culturally responsive practices. Next, are families and cultural backgrounds being sufficiently supported and involved? So there's been a lot of research showing that bridging students' home and school lives helps create a sense of belonging and can be beneficial for their academic achievement. In the survey of teachers in Wisconsin, they said that engaging with parents is one of the most difficult tasks that they face in supporting ELs. And in the focus group in the Rocky Mountain School, they found that communication gaps were a barrier to student achievement, whether that's because of the language barrier, the parents seeing the school environment as unwelcoming, or feeling silenced and ignored. And they found that they need consistency across grade levels and schools within a district. Next, are teachers sufficiently prepared to support Latinx EL students? So in the survey of teachers and principals across Wisconsin, 65% of them had taught ELs within the last 3 years. However, most of them had not participated in any EL-specific professional development during that time. Of those who had, the most common ones were culturally responsive education practices, research-based instructional methods for ELs, and assessment strategies. And in the focus group of teachers and parents in the Rocky Mountain School, they found that they needed more training on EL strategies, best practices, and multiculturalism for all teachers, not just EL teachers. So now I'm going to talk about what my current study is. So I conducted an anonymous survey, and it was sent out to Latinx EL students, their caregivers, general education teachers, special education teachers, English language teachers, and administrators. And I conducted this survey at 2 schools in Wisconsin, one of them being a rural middle/high school, grades 6 through 12. And that school has 14.8% of their school being limited English proficient. And then the other one is an urban elementary school, grades K through 5, with 3.1% students who are limited English proficient. And so far I have 53 completed surveys. And as you can see, most of them were either the students or general education teachers. And I still have my survey open, so I'm hoping to receive more, especially from caregivers, because their input is really important. But yeah, now I'm going to talk about some of my results. So I compiled all of the strategies that were suggested by everyone who took the survey and ordered them in what was most commonly mentioned. So the most commonly mentioned thing was encouraging use of Spanish to scaffold, whether that's having an assistant who speaks Spanish in the classroom, allowing the use of translations, or allowing students who speak Spanish to work together and be able to use their language in order to help them. The next most common thing was visuals, images, and graphics. So really focusing on multimodal instruction. The next was one-on-one or small group instruction with a certified EL teacher, so getting them more individualized support. The students said that speaking practice with their friends and specific help with reading was most helpful for them. A lot of teachers mentioned online resources such as translators or Grammarly. And then they also mentioned explicit vocabulary instruction, modifying, adapting, or differentiating assignments, tests, and texts, and more generally, culturally responsive practices. The next part of the survey results is family and cultural involvement. So overall, the caregivers felt mostly supported and sufficiently accommodated by the schools. And then I have 2 charts here from the student survey. So the first one is, do you ever learn about things in school that you can connect to your family traditions and background? As you can see, most of them said sometimes, and then the rest of them fell more towards never or almost never. With only 2 of them saying always. And then the other one asked them, do you see people that look like you in the things you read and watch in school? And as you can see, all of them said either never, almost never, or sometimes. So as you can see, the students being reflected in what they're learning in school can definitely be improved. And the last part of the survey result, or this is the second part of that, is the family and cultural involvement. So on these charts, the blue is general ed teachers, green is the EL teachers, and purple is the special ed teachers. So I asked, do you feel you're able to maintain a sufficient level of communication with families who speak Spanish? As you can see, most of them said probably not, and it was a little bit spread out, but I found it interesting that the only ones who said definitely yes were EL teachers or special ed teachers. And in the other survey, the other part of the survey they had more training specifically in helping EL students. So I wonder if that had something to do with it, but I found that interesting. And then I also asked, how do educators incorporate, respect, and honor the cultural backgrounds of students in their classes? Most commonly mentioned was diverse materials or books with diverse characters, respecting students and their traditions, giving them opportunities to share their experiences and talking about which holidays they celebrate, building community, and encouraging use of home language. Next is the teacher preparation part of it. So EL teachers regarded that more teacher involvement, training, and consistency would benefit EL students. And the first chart here is asking, do you feel adequately prepared to support ELs in your classroom? can see most of them said probably not or might not, but there was nobody who said definitely not, so that is good. And then the next one is, do you feel that ELs in your class or school receive adequate support in their language learning? Kind of across the board, most of them not too sure, but there is supports in place. So I found it interesting that most of them were might or might not, or probably yes. And then the next part, I asked, how much Spanish do you personally know, to kind of get at that language barrier? Most of them said a little. And then, have you received training and best practices for supporting ELs in your classroom? So there were only a few who had not received any training. And then the rest I divided up by what type of training they had. Most commonly was having some sort of professional development or teacher in service. And as you can see, the special ed teachers had received a lot more training, specifically in that area, than the general ed teachers. So now just some conclusions and things to think about moving forward. So overall, what I noticed was a focus on culturally relevant pedagogy. So just making sure your students see themselves represented in what they're learning in school, getting to know students and their backgrounds, and allowing them to use their first language as a scaffold when possible. Also, family communication and accommodation is essential because it's important for that connection to be in place in order to help the students better. It's important for teachers to seek out professional development training to better support EL students. And then some strategies that were mentioned over and over again were visuals, repetition, explicit instruction, online resources, and adaptions. And then I think the biggest takeaway is just having respect, understanding, and patience for these students and their families, and just wanting the best for them and helping them to succeed. That is it.
Thank you, Bailey.
Thank you, Bailey.